Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Weaver. Welcome to the audio analyst. Pardon me. In light of the class action lawsuit filed on August 18th, 2022 against Mobile Fidelity, and the seemingly clear misunderstandings of the benefits derived from the use of DSD source files in the record mastering process, I have invited a special guest to join us today. In fact, this discussion was predicated on a call we had just after this lawsuit was filed and made public. Now, I have included a link to the site outlining the action in today's description section. But in essence, Stiles versus Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab Incorporated is pretty straightforward. Citing the Illinois Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act and the North Carolina Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act, one Adam Stiles, a North Carolina resident, recently submitted his complaint to an Illinois federal court. Now, the 28-page complaint states that Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab Incorporated has reputedly long claimed that its records labeled Original Master Recording had been created directly from the master recording or original analog tapes without any sort of digital mastering process. The complaint further alleges that the damages were suffered by about 5,000 customers, hence the class action capability, and it is seeking damages in the range of $5 million. Now, my guest today has joined me on the channel previously, and I dare say will be back again. He's a good friend. But as well as discussing the merit and concerns over this lawsuit, I've asked Dr. David W. Robinson, Editor-in-Chief of Positive Feedback, to share his experiences and understanding of DSD, the direct stream digital recording process that MoFi, and honestly, many other mastering companies have adopted. David has been very closely involved with the development of the direct stream digital recording process since the late 1990s. And as such, he was one of the first audio experts to discover and write about the virtues of the direct stream digital format offered over PCM digital recording. In point of fact, I do not know anyone, short of perhaps maybe the engineers and developers of the format, who may be more qualified to discuss the potential of the DSD format or who has more familiarity with its sonic merit and accomplishments. Now, just what is DSD? How does it compare to compact disc, to the higher resolution PCM formats with differing bit depths and sample rates, to super audio compact disc? How does it sound compared directly to an original source tape? And what advantages does it offer over cutting lacquers from such analog masters? Well, David takes us through all of this with one of the most engaging and understandable conversations on this topic available to the general public. Now, I'd urge you to not be daunted by the running length of today's conversation. Take it in smaller bites over several viewings if need be. There is so much important and great information and detail here that consuming it in smaller takes may have advantages. But please, I urge you not to forego this discussion, as the benefits you will realize from the wealth of Dr. Robinson's depth and breadth of the experiences he shares here with us today is invaluable and just may open some ears to the reality of the situation, especially for those of you who immediately flinch at the mere mention of digital recording. Let's take it away. All right, everybody. Here he is, my friend and colleague, Dr. David W. Robinson, the editor-in-chief of Positive Feedback magazine, and a guy who's been putting up with my work for, 25 years now?
I wouldn't say putting up with.
Well, you're very kind, my friend. Welcome to the channel again today, buddy.
Yeah, good to be back, Greg. I always enjoy talking with you.
It's always fun chatting with you, buddy. Right. We had so much fun at Pacific Audio Fest. It's not, we shouldn't talk about it.
Well, that's enough of that. Let's bring on the drinks.
Yes. So the reason I invited you back today for this episode, it was predicated on a conversation we had last week when you had brought up the pending lot. What it's not a class action suit against Mobile Fidelity from this one Adam Stiles. He's a North Carolina resident. He recently
Right.
submitted this relatively straightforward complaint to an
Right.
Illinois federal court because that's where MoFi and Music Direct are. But it's based on the fact that Mobile Fidelity has long claimed that they were making original master recordings that were created directly from master recordings or original analog tapes without any sort of digital mastering process. That's what the complaint says. And by the way, folks, I've linked the complaint itself in the description section today, so you can go take a look at that. But in the complaint that you alerted me to, David, it talks about the Illinois Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act and the the North Carolina Unfair and Deceptive Trade Policies Act. But I'm concerned. It says while there's no exact number needed for a class action lawsuit, that it takes usually at least a few dozen members or a few dozen complainants to become likely to move forward. Now, you had brought up something different on that thought the other night. You had thought this may not actually come to be. Is that a possibility?
I conferred with a very close friend of mine who is a practicing attorney himself, and I had actually forwarded him the legal action, the suit, and he looked it over and evaluated it, and he had two reactions. One was, "Wow," he says, "This is going to be controversial." But his second reaction was that when it comes to actually forming necessary critical mass for a complaint like this to go class action is not a slam dunk.
Okay.
As I recall, the complaint alleges that possibly up to 5,000 people were affected by this all over the country. Of course, a U.S. class action lawsuit only applies in the United States.
Right.
Anybody who was buying from overseas is not a party to this. And so they said, as I'm recalling, perhaps 5,000. And my friend looked at it and he said, well, maybe not. He says it is not automatic to be able to create a class. The judge in the case will make his determination or her determination that there's sufficient critical mass to proceed with a class action, and they can decide yes or no. So as to whether or not it's going to end up in a class action lawsuit, we're going to have to wait and see.
Well, we'll wait for that to develop. Yeah, we'll see how
Right.
that develops. Now, one of the main reasons I wanted to have you back and to talk about this is you have been deeply involved, both with personal experiences and by following the development of direct stream digital since the late 1990s. I mean,
Right.
you were one of the first experts to talk about and really pay attention to what direct stream digital had to offer. And honestly, I can't think of anyone more versed in or qualified to talk about the potential of DSD. And I'm grateful you're willing to talk to us about it. I mean, we talked about this briefly, and we don't necessarily see mastering from DSD as a negative thing, correct?
No. Wow. There are really two aspects to this, Greg, and we've talked about this before. The one aspect, and the one drawing a great deal of attention, is the whole question of transparency and making mastering processes and procedures very clear to the audiophile who's purchasing them. That's one area.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of focus and a great deal of yelling and screaming over in that area. And rightly so. I mean, there is an issue there.
Sure. Well, and very briefly, that was the crux of the biscuit of my episode a couple of weeks ago, where I
Right,
said I find the most egregious problem with this is the lack of transparency, the apparent obfuscation of what they were doing, rather than just coming out and talking about what needed to be done to make it work. And
right,
I said at that point, I said, just let the records stand on their own merit, what they sound like. Listen
right,
to them. If you don't like the way they sound, fine, don't buy them.
right, right.
But then we move on to the second issue, which is where
Yes.
you really have a lot to offer.
Yeah, and this is as an area of concentration. There's this question of DSD, and in a very real sense, this issue allows us to have a very salutary discussion, or at least a potentially salutary discussion of DSD, which has, from its beginnings, has been a topic of some ambivalence and certainly a pretty fair amount of ignorance
Yeah.
amongst many audiophiles. Um, if we take a look at the question, some of it's simply a question of being ill-informed. Some of it is a worldview question, though, and this is where things get very interesting. There are people who, in the world of recordings, prefer strongly, and in many cases totally, analog sources. Okay, so they may be listening to, well, there's probably certainly listening to LPs. Some people have gone out and made the extraordinary commitment to go to reel tape. And they want everything in the chain that produced their source, whatever the source is, to have been taken from an analog source and put through an analog chain to get there.
Right.
And this would be defined as old school. It's going to be, let's say, some reel-to-reel tape source. That's the most common. We're going to take that. We're going to run that through an editing and mastering system and so forth that represents all analog processing. And at the far end, then we're going to take that over to either, let's say, an LP or a reel-to-reel tape, and that's going to be it. It's all analog. That's the way that it's defined. And I think if you're going to phrase the process as all analog, if you're going to use that phrase,
Yeah.
That's going to be the pretty common audiophile understanding. Okay, there was no digital. Now, that introduces a series of real questions for us down the road, though, and these are questions that people need to become informed on if they aren't already. That is a particular aesthetic within the audio arts. Note the plural. There's more than one way to master a record. Now, we're all familiar at the other end of things with the free-for-all that has gone on during the vinyl resurgence, in which people take Red Book quality standard files. Okay, so it's PCM, pulse code modulation, sampled at 44.1 kHz, 16-bit D words, blap that baby onto your mastering chain and turn that into an album.
We both find that to be pretty appalling. Yeah,
that's pretty obnoxious.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's the thing. During the headlong rush into Red Book and CDs, there were an awful lot of groups and producers. That's how they recorded it.
Yeah.
You say, I want the master. You're going to say the master is a 44.1 kHz, 16-bit.
Yeah.
It's a Red Book. It's a CD.
Yeah.
And purists will say then, well, then listen to the CD. Don't do anything else with it. Don't try to rush it over onto vinyl. The wolf should not put on sheep's clothing. Other people say, hey, I kind of like this sound. And of course, younger generations that have come along, the younger generations that we older audiophiles keep saying that we're trying to encourage and to chase down and get them interested. I mean, that's, to them, CD is actually high definition.
Yeah.
That is high quality.
Yeah.
It takes some education to get them to see other alternatives that are much higher resolution than that. Okay, so
Well, and many of them come from that based on, they see music as a commodity rather than, you and I look at it as something you own, and
right.
they grew up with MP3 playback, which
Sure.
it just doesn't have anything to attract me.
No, MP3 was just a way to compress the hell out of a PCM signal so that you could put it through low bandwidth pipes.
Yep.
On the internet. Well, pipes aren't low bandwidth anymore. And it wasn't audio that changed that. Heck, it was video.
It was pornography, actually, I believe.
Video officially. As to what's being consumed, I would hope you're not doing that, but if you're doing
I'm just saying that's what the
impetus
was.
Tell me that you're doing that, okay? No, just from the standpoint of bandwidth pipelines, it's video that's driven it. You have to, for 4K streaming video, man, you've got to have some serious bandwidth.
Bandwidth, yeah.
If you have multiple people in a household who are gaming and doing everything else, they've got to have some bandwidth. So that's what really drove it. And the nice thing is that they constructed a big enough tunnel that our high quality, high resolution audio can come through just fine. Matter of fact, it's an easy feed to be able to do that. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at the DSD question.
Maybe I could ask you to define what DSD is. So, we may have a lot of people who don't get the difference between PCM and DSD.
Right. PCM, which let's say a CD, you take a CD. PCM is pulse code modulation. Pulse code modulation takes an incoming analog signal and it samples it 44.1 thousand times a second and takes those samples and organizes them into what we would call data words, D words that are 16 bits wide, okay, per channel. So you're really, you can think of it almost as strobing the incoming signal. That's what you're doing. You're strobing and you're organizing those 16-bit D words, and then that in turn is what's recorded. And when Sony first announced this back in the early 80s, 82, 83, they used the unfortunate marketing phrase, perfect sound forever. It wasn't. It's redundant of me to spend time critiquing Redbook. Everybody knows, in the high-end world, everybody knows what the limitations are. We put up with the limitations if that's all we've got.
And to be fair, today's players that play Redbook CD have made some huge strides,
right,
and it can be quite pleasant. I'm not going to say that you should never listen to CD. I'm much more format agnostic than I've ever been.
Right.
And with the exception of there's a lot of the pop music that was mastered in the 80s that I think the problem with it was they were mastered for car radio rather than normal playback. They're kind of hard to listen to, but CDs can be eminently listenable. Not my preferred choice, but way better than MP3.
What we have to remember is that CDs are now a mature format. They've been here for 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years in audio history. That's a good amount of time.
It's a long time.
And
All cassette didn't last that long.
oh, I mean, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
But the fact is that the CDs represented a way of encoding.
Mhm.
When we fast forward to the 90s, however, Sony Music made the decision to acquire Columbia Records and all of its massive archives and everything else. Spent a pile of money to acquire that. And the problem that was immediate was, here we have an enormous archive of analog tapes. That was what things were recorded on. Now I'm sure there was some digital in there too. By that time,
yeah,
there were probably about a decade's worth of digital sitting there too. But their main concern was the analog masters. Why? Well, because analog masters have a shelf life. Analog tapes they do pretty well if you properly archive them. And I'm talking about temperature, humidity. You keep them away from sunlight. You don't overuse them and so forth.
Correct.
I don't think it's very arguable, even the most dyed-in-the-wool reel-to-reel lover, and I'm one of them. I have a very big investment in reel-to-reel. Would concede that over time, your analog masters, unlike wine or whiskey or bourbon, does not improve, doesn't get more interesting, doesn't get more complex. It just it does what human beings do. It starts to get old, gray, and ugly. And so you have to do everything in the first place to store them right.
Right. Let
me hit the folks watching this with a basic principle. The major record labels are not your friend. If you're an audiophile, the labels are not thinking about you. They're not even thinking about, gee, we should spend millions of dollars to upgrade how we handle and store our tapes. And what that means is that they have, some of the storage is good, some of it's not so good, some of it's miserable. Yeah. All I have to say is Universal Music Group fire of 2008 to remind audiophiles everywhere that tens of thousands of recordings, irreplaceable, can be irreplaceably lost.
And I've heard that number might be as high as 175,000 masters.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's just obscene.
And
such a loss.
Many of the groups didn't even know that their masters were being stored there.
Yeah.
They didn't find out in some cases until years later
when they tried to make a record. Yeah.
Let's see, I'm getting older and I would like to make a little more money, so let's issue a greatest hits.
Yeah. Well, the tapes are gone, buddy.
That's right. The greatest hits are now the greatest ashes, and so you've got an enormous problem. What Sony and Philips did that was innovative was they decided that they needed to archive in a digital format. Now, regardless of how you feel about the word digital, and some people have, again, it's worldview with them. They don't, as soon as they hear the word digital, they just shut down.
Yeah.
Because they tend to think about Redbook CDs, MP3s, crappy music they've heard, crappy formats, low resolution stuff. But Sony and Philips approach this from the standpoint of, and not merely increasing the sampling rate, but shifting to a different method of encoding entirely. Yeah. So they work together, Sony and Philips, and a very gifted team of engineers and their support folks came up with something it's not like it was a massive new discovery. It had been there before. It just hadn't been utilized. And that was direct stream digital. That's what Sony chose to call it. This was in theory, it's a single bit system, not a multi-bit, no 16-bit D words. It would instead of strobing 44.1 thousand times a second, it would measure the position, in effect, take a look at bits as single bit, but they'd sample it at 64 times that CD rate. Which
Right. It's a pulse density capture kind of, and it's
well, and it's pulse in terms of modulation, it's pulse wave modulation.
Yeah.
It's really concentrating on change and not on trying to nail down an absolute
deviation as it
right. It's not decimating, and there are a whole set of technical challenges that go with PCM.
And you were saying that it's 64 times denser signal. It's like, what is it? It's like 2.8 megahertz, I believe, is the frequency.
The sampling rate would be qualified as 64 times the 44.1 kHz or 2.8224 megahertz.
Yeah.
And what they found in going to this format and this sampling rate, this whole encoding method, sampling rate, etc., was that the sound began to behave more and more not like PCM digital, but more analog like. It had a different set of challenges, the noise shaping, the filtering, and so forth. And they had to do some fairly radical things to get this 64 times rate, or what we now call DSD 64, or colloquially we refer to a single DSD.
Right.
To use that, and it's totally different encoding method. There are a whole lot of challenges with it. There's simply no doubt about it. But the ultimate result, and for audiophiles, that really has to be the ultimate result here at the ear. How does it sound? And what Sony did that was amazing was this, which was originally started as a project that they could use to start doing archives, creating backups of their analog masters. They actually realized that this had possibilities as a consumer format.
That was the dawn of the SACD.
Yes, and so they had to formulate. We refer to standard CDs as following the Red Book specification. It's a set of specs and everything that go with that format. What was developed was called the Orange Book, and that was for SACD. And this used much higher capacity discs. They wanted to keep it to the same size, make the disc the same size, which is what we've done with albums quite a lot over the years too.
Yeah.
And with tapes, you're playing a time capacity game versus what can be stored. Okay. And so they decided they'd nail down the physical size, just standardize that. But to do that, they had to go to not a red laser to read. They had to go blue. They had to go to higher capacity discs that required shorter wavelengths to be able to read the higher density. A CDR will not hold a significant amount of data that comes to DSD. You got to take it to a higher capacity disk. And since they were available, that's what they ended up doing. This is all around the same time that DVD is coming along, followed shortly by Blu-ray.
Right.
So the capacities were growing. The internet was getting faster and faster over time. computers were becoming much more powerful, and hard drives, the price of hard drives. You remember that very well. You're an
Oh,
IT,
yeah.
you're an IT bud yourself. So all of these things, when they coalesced, led to, wow, what would have been technically challenging in the early 80s was now doable. Heck,
More than just doable, it was quite easy to get done. It
sure,
became quite easy to get done.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so what happened over time, just to finish the thread, what happened over time was that the SACD, well, I'll try to avoid the phrase screwed to pooch in association with Sony, those poor guys. I will say that they muffed the launch of their format, which was just starting to develop traction in the
Yeah.
marketplace, especially after the hybrids came along.
Well, thanks to guys like you. You were all over that format. I got into it because you were so high on it. It was
well, it
an
was
amazing change when it came out.
when I first heard it in September of 1998 at Mobile Fidelity. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I really was. At the time, I said that it was the first true advance in audio in 40 years. Um, it is. It was. It represented digital, what was technically digital, but a digital that behaves like analog. That sounds like analog. That can be used in the mastering process as
Yeah.
analog. All of these things were there. In the course of time, Sony having done that, uh, it's not like SACDs have gone away.
No.
We see between 250 and 300 new titles a year emerging, and generally they're important titles. Um, and a lot of people would go broke if they had to buy that many SACDs a year. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And there are some discerning labels who have strongly stated a preference for the format. Of course, Mobile Fidelity is one,
Sure.
but so is Analog Productions and Chad Kazem. He cranks out SACDs all the time, and they're coming. He carries them from all over the world. So there are, the last time I checked the count, there were over 15,000 SACD titles that have been issued. Here at Positive Feedback, we have a library of SACDs that's over 7,500.
Wow.
And so, from our standpoint, sure, that was the way to go. Certainly preferable to
To
a
Redwood.
CD,
Yeah.
assuming that one takes advantage of what the format can deliver,
Right.
and you just don't take a CD
And upsample it.
and stick it over onto an
Yeah.
SACD, which is doable. It is not commendable. So, in the course of time, the Sony just its interactions with its own baby are few and farther between. But we reached a point at which the idea of decoupling DSD from SACD became a priority for some in the audiophile community. Okay. Problem with any optical standard is you gotta hew to the standard.
Yeah.
And that includes the sampling rate and everything. But we were already starting to turn up the clock. Double DSD
Yep.
was developed. Well, now you're doing single bit, but your sampling rate has been up to 5.6 megahertz. And believe me, it sounded a whole lot better. Whole lot better. Single versus double. You can, I mean, let's face it. If you take a CD that's been mastered in Redbook and you take the same thing, presumably from an analog source that is pulled to single DSD, you're okay. Game is over.
Yeah.
Or there's something wrong with your hearing. Double DSD turned up the clock. You'd normally not be able to do that, but they kicked loose from the SACD, from optical entirely, and turned it into downloadable files. By that time, the internet had grown to the point where you could purchase these things online and download them.
Yep.
Which I have tons of them here. And then after that, they turned the crank again. Their quad DSD came along. That's DSD 256. Well, now you're sampling 11.2 megahertz. And I got to tell you,
It's pretty good.
well,
It's pretty good.
there's an 8 times and even a 16 times.
Yeah.
I have sample files of all of those.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, the only 8 and 16 bit, or I'm sorry, 8 and 16 times DSD are not natively recordable yet.
That's correct. They are. This is where you can get into some terminology discussion. Some people would say upsampled, but for example, Tom Caulfield, who works with native DSD in their mastering process, he's the one who has produced some of these, and he speaks of remodulation. You start with an underlying quad DSD file, and then you remodulate the file to higher clock rates. And as to what final term we might give that process, that's still open to discussion. But Tom has sent me copies. I've got copies of files where I can listen to what he did at quad DSD. I can listen to it at DSD 512. So DSD 256, DSD 512, and DSD 1024.
Yeah.
And it's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Remember, every time you double the clock rate, you're doubling the file size.
Right.
Okay, so for the additional, you go from quad to DSD 512, you're getting a little something. Yeah, it's distant presence, maybe a little bit more a sense of the air molecules bumping each other. And by the time you get to 1024, it's like, wow, that's a really big file.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah.
Yeah. So
we're probably looking at 32 to 40 gig files.
These things are huge.
Yeah.
Huge. And so, you can download them. We have gigabit here, but it's still going to take some time. And of course, it's going to take storage space. Thank God for cheap hard drives. So what the conclusion I've come to is that the sweet spot is at quad DSD
256.
That's where you're getting maximum bang for the buck. It's the highest level that we can record at currently. That's an A to D challenge.
Yes.
You have to have a chipset that will do that.
Yeah.
And companies like Merging Technologies, for example, have been doing this for many years. They really saw the greatest possibilities at DSD 256. Okay, so that's a very brief summary, believe it or not, of how we got to where we are. Happened over a number of years. And so let's return to the mobile fidelity contretemps. What happened, to the best of my understanding, I've been following it for a while now, is that when Mobile Fidelity announced that they were going to be releasing Michael Jackson's Thriller on the one-step process, that raised a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's what let the cat out of the bag when they announced 40,000 copies.
No, it was like 50.
Okay.
And people don't know anything about LP mastering. If you're talking about some level of tape source, we hear about original master tapes, which is a totally separate can of vipers. We can't even go into it in any depth here right now. But the fact is that you're taking a tape, whatever it is, I will tell you for sure, it is not the stereo master tape.
Yeah.
It is not that tape.
Yeah.
Please remove from your mind that companies are shipping their family jewel.
Yeah. Well, that was part of the onset of this problem, was that Sony and other vaults simply refused to ship original tapes. So the initial thing was they either had to take whatever tools they could take portably to a vault to duplicate a tape, or come up with something else, which kind of, and what you were talking about was when MoFi announced 50,000 copies. Anybody that knows that these one steps, they claim they can't make more than 1,000 off each stamper. So that meant 50 runs of a master tape. There's nobody out there that's going to let you have their master tape and run it 50 times.
Oh, it's.
I mean, it's just not going to happen.
In the first place, you're not going to have the original master.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
I mean, really, in the production process, either you and your machine go over to New York or Los Angeles or London or someplace like that and make a copy, or you don't have a project.
Yeah.
And so let's assume best case scenario is you have a second generation tape. It's even more likely you're going to get a third generation tape. And we have an article by Harold Titchener over at Positive Feedback right now that does a very lovely job. He's a take archivist. Lovely job of taking you through all the possible levels of tape, source tape. And some of it gets down there to the pretty thin levels, believe me. So you take your source, I just call it source tape, whatever it is. You take the source tape, and yes, in running things through, you're going to take the tape, you're going to make your lacquer. From the lacquer, you're going to be producing the mother, and then you're going to be producing various stamper sets, the daughter sets that are done. And yeah, about every 1,000 pressings, you're done. You can't keep using it. You're losing resolution with each physical pressing, which is another one of the limitations of analog, of course. The people who love it says, man, that floats my boat. Me, I say, how many bloody damn times do you think you're going to be able to run even a copy of a master tape? So if you're going to issue, hey, and it was reasonable, 50,000 copies of Michael Jackson's Thriller from MoFi is one step, they're going to go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They're going to go. I mean, that's going to sell.
Yeah.
But to take your source tape at whatever generation it is and run it 50 times, this is another, and it's a very important limitation to analog tapes that you're going to have to get used to if you're an analog lover. I'm an analog lover. I'm used to it. Please be an informed analog lover. So you have to realize, wow, even a very limited run of 5,000, some tape had to be played 5 times. And with analog, play 1 was theoretically better than play 5.
Yeah, certainly better than play 5. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so that's why all the stamper numbers became such a hot issue over the years.
Yep.
And said Harry Pearson, you want an S1, you want stamper, and on it went. Guys like Tom Port would argue back, no, you want the hot stamper. You want the stamper that was done by the guy who was particularly inspired on a day, and he really did it right, and it all came together. And with this album, we think it's Stamper 13. Look for S13.
Yeah.
And, so a dogfight.
Well, it's part of the charm of collecting records. It may not be a science necessarily, but it's part of the charm, right? I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely. Hey, this is collectors. Collecting is a mindset.
Yeah.
That people collect stamps.
Yeah.
People collect coins.
Yeah.
I mean, people collect all sorts of stuff. Some of it's just very weird.
Sure.
And okay, so you're a collector. That means that you you want things to be rare and hard to get, and I mean that leads to higher value for what you have, whatever it is you're collecting. And relative scarcity is a collectible thing. I mean,
Sure.
it's a pheromone for collectors. We get that. But to not realize that your sources, the true original stereo master, okay, the one that maybe a multi-tape has been taken down to, that original stereo master can only be run so many times without, even in the best of circumstances, without beginning to lose some things. And, it starts at the high frequencies, and this is not even to get into the whole snake pit of the discussion of what do we do with Dolby noise reduction. Sure. And all of the weird stuff.
BBX. You've got the abrasive tapeware. You've got print through over all these plays. So the more you play it, the less.
And the tape formulations, oh, that big mess, and the lubricants used. There's a period of time during which went from the late 60s into the 70s, where some of the formulations that they went to get away from using whale oil as a lubricant ended up not working so well and having shorter shelf lives. And so there are well-known recordings that are very problematic because the original tapes are just shot to heck.
Yeah.
I still remember when Michael Oldfield did Tubular Bells. Took him 18 months of constantly layering multi-track and going back and forth and splicing and re-editing and everything else. What happened after about 18 months was the tape broke and wore out completely. He had worn out the tape.
Yeah.
Big tape. He had to start over the whole project from scratch. Now, he did it faster the second time because he knew what he wanted to do. But the fact was that he literally wore out and broke the tape during production. Hell, we're not talking about remaster. We're talking production. He wore it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Splices get old and gummy. Things at the binders that are being used. Next thing you know is you can find your reel-to-reel machine covered with a whole lot of oxide. You're having to sometimes to do things right. You're having to clean your heads between each song,
between each cut.
Yep, and regularly demagnetize. Well, all of this leads to the fact that analog has its problems. And its main problem, if it would last forever, gee, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. And we've lost a lot already. And the same thing that Sony realized is what we need to realize. And that is we need to have a format that's digital because digital has advantages, but behaves like analog. We want it to feel like analog. We want it to sound like analog. Something that can go in multiple directions. And they came up with the original DSD 64, but what a number of engineers, and I know a number of engineers in the field, the conclusion we came to a long time ago, first time I heard quad DSD, I said, brother, that is it. And I've got so much quad DSD here. I've done the A/B tests. I've done single blind listening between source tape and a real-time quad DSD, AD to DA, and out.
Trust me, he's not kidding. He's told me some of these stories, and it'd be too long to go into here. But
yeah, I'm not.
You've got war stories, brother.
They're there. And so quad DSD is what engineers like Michael Bishop of Telarc and 5-4 Productions and the like quad DSD is what, good grief, what a number of engineers would tell you when they've had experience with it. It's there. It is. There it is.
Well,
Now,
and one of the advantages we talked about the other night was, older tapes that get played. Even if they were at the proper speed when they were made, they can stretch. There can be wow and flutter, and there are digital processes like this plangent process,
right.
which really lets you fix those problems without any seeming audible change to the rest of the music.
Yeah, I mean, we really have technologies associated with digital that allow us to correct a lot of things. And the analog you and I have talked about is to, for example, film restoration.
Yeah.
Anybody who's seen a beautifully restored 4K of a classic movie like Lawrence of Arabia ought to be giving thanks to God for the fact that we didn't just flat out lose Lawrence of Arabia, because the camera negative was fading fast.
Oh, it was from '62. I mean, it was,
it was the color shifts. As soon as you're using chemicals on film, over time, even with the best of intentions, it's got a limited shelf life. You got to get it through. I'm thankful we've got 4K, and we're going to be seeing 8K soon.
Yeah.
The ability to do restoration has absolutely revolutionized the quality of video. We, in like fashion, ought to be very, very thankful that we have an audio equivalent to that process. And I'll just tell you flat out that quad DSD is the audio analog. It's the 15 inches per second of reel to reel. 15 IPS of reel to reel was the sweet spot on reel to reel. The best trade-off of tape versus resolution versus frequency response, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a trade-off there. We found, from 1954, when Columbia first began to play around with a long play record, the LP, they came to standardize size versus playing time. Same thing. And the nice thing about hard drives is because they are inexpensive and they are easily made hardened against loss, accidental loss. Easily. The computer technologies are there, guys.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about losing our archives the way we do. We're sweating bullets with chemicals on film, and we're sweating bullets with chemicals on tape. That's the truth. We have to get them to a format that allows us to preserve them for the next 1,000 years. And if we pull back from that out of some sort of, in my opinion, misguided analog purism, when we haven't, in most cases, really experienced the possibilities of quad DSD on a good system.
Sure.
Analog, turntable over there, oh boy, you should hear it on my system. Well, brother, you and I have both heard the best turntable on the planet. We know how good analog can be and all the rest of that. But in like fashion, if you go with a state-of-the-art quad DSD system, don't come flapping your jaws at me saying that, oh, I can feel this digital edge. That is in the fine category of bullshit. The fact is that this is, and I've done the tests and I've talked to the engineers, I've listened with engineers. Their comment is at quad DSD levels, they can't tell the difference between the master tape and the quad DSD.
Well, you shared a story with me where you spent time with quad DSD and a very closely matched system that was sourced from DSD playback and analog tape playback. You said it was within, what, 1/10 of a dB setup. And that everybody in the room was asked to pick one for every track, whatever was done. And my recollection was that to the man, everybody seemed to prefer the DSD version. They thought that was the better version.
Well, what we were asked to do And there were only three of us in the room. It wasn't a big crowd. There were three of us, but we were all expert listeners. And I'll reveal that one of them was Chad Kassem, one of them was Michael Bishop, and one of them was me.
Yeah.
And Andreas Koch of Playback Designs, who's one of the geniuses of DSD, he had a simple playback where he had a reel-to-reel tape from Pro Audio in Chicago, and he had one of his Sonoma AD and DA stacks. And so it was a split feed, and the split feed went to, from the analog, would go straight to the integrated amp we're using. And on the other side, another feed went to the Sonoma AD, and then that cascaded to the Sonoma DA, and then that went to the integrated. Same amp, same volume level, same everything. Everything's matched. And we were challenged to tell single blind. Andreas knew what was going on, but we didn't.
Right.
And Andreas has a very good poker face. So it was, he says, which one? We're going to do this a handful of times. Which one is the master tape? And we didn't say anything to each other. We just tracked which one we thought. Was it the first? Was it the second? And he was flip-flopped. And he says, I'm going to be changing. It's not all going to be the same. And at the end, we tabulated the results, and all three of us, as expert listeners, had unerringly chosen the DSD 256 as the master tape. And when we talked about that, I mean, not once did we pick the master tape as the master tape. We picked the quad DSD every time, all of us. And we were all very bemused by this. I mean, it's, Chad, he appreciated it and everything, but he was set back.
I'm sure.
It's just, so let's just take my word for it. If you don't want to take my word for it, I'm fine. I smoke cigars and enjoy port, and I'll live without you. But if you're wise, you're going to at least begin to explore the possibility. If you're not experienced with quad DSD on a good system, let's put that in, because high-end audio is about not just getting by, not just cheap junk. It's about finding what the possibilities are.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that being the case, let's return to MoFi. The best that I've been able to put together from all the research I've done is that right around the year 2011, which was the year that One Step came into existence, the very first one, the Santana Abraxas.
That was 2014. They released the first One Step.
Was it One Step? Well, then it was in 2000, because I know the year. It was 2000. They began to introduce. They began to introduce something that they had come to the conclusion was better.
Yeah. I'm sorry to bring it up, but that Santana came out in 2014.
Well, yeah, the one I'm trying to find.
Yeah.
They
keep my eyes open, buddy.
I talked to John Woods over at MoFi, and he says we don't have it.
Yeah.
I
told you I bought two and made the mistake of selling one to an audio buddy right away.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, but in 2011, it's when the production team, and I've known those guys for years. They've got a great production team.
Yeah.
Guys like Sean Britton and so forth. They know whereof they speak.
Yeah.
And they began to introduce DSD 256, quad DSD, into their mastering process. And they did it in this particular way. What they found was, please understand if you don't, that even when you have your source tape of whatever generation arriving, you've got to go over that tape to make sure that all the splices, if there are does it have splices? What condition are the splices? How old is the tape? And then a particular criticality, you have to analyze for azimuth. You've
Get
got
the
to make
alignment for
sure.
each,
Well,
every splice can be different.
you've got to make sure
Yeah.
that you've got an azimuth map for that tape, because with tape recorders, deviation from correct azimuth is going to affect frequency response, the sparkle, the sense of live, and you are there. It'll affect it massively, not just a little bit. So you do all that to get it ready. It can take anywhere from hours to a day or two.
Yeah.
Where the engineer, that's all they're doing is analyzing, evaluating the tape. And if it's necessary, if splices are there and they're going gooey, they have to then repair. They have to replace those splices. And you have got to be a real expert, a real master to do this. Okay. But then once they had everything just so, here's your bite at the apple. If you're doing a standard all analog, what happens is we're going to roll that tape to produce a lacquer. And every time we go through 1,000, we're going to have to roll that tape again to produce another lacquer. And you know how it goes. Not every 1,000.
With minuscule degradation, every replay.
Every replay, a little something's being lost. And so, which is why it's more likely that you don't have the original master tape. It's your source tape. Let's call it source tape.
Yeah.
It's taking a little bit of a hit every time.
Yeah.
And one thing we also have to keep in mind is that tape has gotten a lot harder to find, and really good tape is expensive. And it would only take a few companies pulling the plug and you'd have no analog tape.
Yeah.
Then you're not doing it. Analog tape just goes away. Then you're done. You're stuck with what you have in your archives, and that's it, brother. And that'll be the end of an era. So we got to hope and pray they don't do that, because I got a big investment.
Well, yeah. My understanding is there's only really 2 manufacturers of bulk tape today. So
yeah, a pro grade,
pro grade tape, yeah. So
and so these what they did after doing significant testing, these guys were right there at the beginning with DSD.
Yeah.
I mean, they worked together tightly with Sony Philips.
Well, you said you first heard DSD there in '98. That was where you heard it.
September of '98, and I was in the room with a room full of luminaries. Okay. Tim DePerisini was there. Ed Meitner was there.
Tim.
Hayataka Nishio from the SACD Project Japan was there. There were a lot of folks in the room. John Wood was there. They had Andrew Demery was there. This is a brilliant group of people. And Positive Feedback we were the very first that were allowed to hear DSD and do some A/B comparisons between that and the source tape. Okay, great. And it just knocked me for a loop. And ever since then, I have very consistently said, boom. On the digital side, DSD.
Yeah.
Together with all its challenges, because it has challenges. There are many challenges. This is the way to go. This is the way forward. Anything else moves sideways or backwards.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, my association with Positive Feedback with you is why I finally got into digital replay. Yeah. It was about 2014 when you were extolling the virtues of DSD 256.
Oh, yeah.
That I finally decided it was time to maybe start looking at getting a good DAC. Now, I've had CD players since early on.
Right.
Not very many were fun to listen to.
No.
I think it was 92 or 3. I got the first CD player I really enjoyed, which was the Luxman D105U. It had a pair of 6 CG7s in the output stage. And it was one of the first semi-musical CD players I'd ever heard. But you were the reason, buddy. Your work at Positive Feedback is what dragged me back into the digital side. And as I said, now I'm considerably more agnostic about formats than I've ever been.
Yeah, I mean, and we should be.
Yeah.
From that standpoint, does it sound good?
Yeah. Now, do you see this How do you? I don't. I'm not necessarily asking you to make a prediction, but I am curious what your thoughts are on the future of the MoFi records. Now,
Yeah.
I'll be happy to give you my take when you get a chance. I'm curious what your thought is.
Well, I want to finish one thought first.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
When they had done extensive listening tests there going back to 2011, they came to the conclusion that quad DSD had finally reached the point where it was the master. And when you listen to your source tape and listen to that, you could tell the difference. You really could.
Yeah.
You know, some people claim to have the hearing of bats and so forth. I suspect they may not be hearing what they think they hear. The fact is that I have good hearing, and what I've determined through careful listening is this is the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Okay. What MoFi did was when they realized that was they said, "Ha, let's solve a big problem. When we get that source tape ready to go, let's take it to quad DSD. This nice straight pull to quad DSD.
And then we've got something we can work with. Yeah.
Now,
over and over and over, no problems, whatever.
We can set aside the tape. We can store the tape. And with this, we're still going to have to cut a new lacquer every 1,000. That's a limitation of analog. But then we're not wearing out a tape.
Right.
Which means that we can do an unlimited number of pressings. And they weren't the first to do this. I need to mention that Abco Records, back in the very early 2000s, 2001, 2, somewhere in there, they reissued all 22 of the Stones recordings, all the early Stones recordings that were done when they were associated with Abco Records. Okay, I've got them all. 22 SACDs, and boy, do they sound good. Afterwards, I noticed that they apparently took 11 of them, half of them, and they pressed them to vinyl. A new issue of 11 Stones Abco recordings to vinyl, and they were mastered. And it says so right on the album that they were mastered from the DSD master that was used for the SACDs. And I listened to those albums. Those albums sound really good.
Yeah.
Really good. And that's single DSD.
Yeah.
You
2001. Yeah.
2001, 2, somewhere in there. Okay. I have those 11 LPs here. They sound terrific. You know what the change it makes? It doesn't change how many presses we can get out of a stamper. What it does change is every single pressing run. You know, stamper 1, stamper 2, they're all the same.
Well, they certainly have that potential. If there's some kind of screw up in lathe at the
lathe,
lathe,
but from the standpoint of source, they're the same.
Yeah,
they're the same. And now this may make some collectors
a little antsy.
Sad.
Yeah.
It's
I think it's great, actually.
It's the charm of collecting and everything, but I want, as an audiophile, I want maximum proliferation of top-notch recordings to as many people as can do it, not just for the few people who are either obsessive, maniacs, wealthy, or weird. Okay, I'd like to get it out to. I'd like my grandsons to be able to buy these albums and enjoy them at a quality level every bit as good as the ones that I do.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, since sonically, quad DSD, the heck with the LP or anybody talking about LP artifact, comparing it to the source, which to me is the acid test. Brother, there it is.
Yeah.
It's in a format it's in a format that can be, I mean, really, it's very simple. I could right here, you send me a source tape. I have Andreas's system here. I could pull off of a reel-to-reel tape, quad DSD, in stereo, and ship it right to you, and you could press albums all day long at the very highest quality possible.
Well,
Okay?
and more importantly, 200 years from now,
Yes.
somebody can still pull up that recording and hear
Yep.
it the same way,
Same
which
way.
the tape will be just debris by then.
Yeah,
You know?
it's look, ashes to ashes and dust to dust, and things analog. And I say that with real melancholy.
Yeah,
I wish it wasn't, but it is an issue. I
it
know.
is the case. Yeah,
I've
it's just
got
the reality of it.
I've got tapes that are over 50 years old from my own personal collection that I recorded jam sessions on when I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
And some of those boxes I don't even want to open. I think it would depress me. Okay, so
Well, I think we both pretty much agree that the issue with Mobile Fidelity is that they should have, had they had the foresight and the sense to step out in front of this and say, look, the reality of today's situation with the access to master tapes is a different world than it has always been up until this point.
Right.
So we make this pledge, and this pledge only. We will do everything in our power to give you the best sounding recording we can. If it can be pure analog, so be it. If not, it will still be the best sounding recording we can make. They would have done two things to the positive side at that point. They would have assured that this lawsuit never would have happened, that nobody would be able to complain that they'd been hoodwinked. And two, they would have been, in my eyes, they would have been seen as innovators. If people being, look, we're taking the right route here. You may disagree with us. Those of you that are pure analog freaks, you may find this to be, go against the grain of your personal beliefs. But we ask you, just listen to the recordings and judge them on that merit alone, how they sound.
Right.
And I think, I just feel so bad that this had to get to this point, because, when I first had some questions about this was the Donald Fagen Nightfly release.
Right.
Because that was one of the first that I'm aware of, one of the first popular recordings that was done, not classical, one of the first popular recordings that was done in purely digital domain.
Right.
And the record they released, I assume you've heard it. It sounds magnificent.
Oh,
I mean, it's fabulous.
Maybe I got 20 copies of Nightfly.
Yeah, I probably have 6 or 7 at least.
Well, no, I'm teasing, but I definitely have 6 or 7.
Yeah, I have 6 or 7.
It was an all digital production, and music critics are generally agreed it's one of the great albums of its time, just flat out. And I think that one, I can't remember if that one was done. It was digital. I don't recall the resolution. I can't believe that
it was early.
Yeah, it was early, so it was probably 44.1.
I don't think so. We'll have to look this up, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, for some reason 9624 is in my mind, but I don't know again if they upsample.
Yeah.
So if you ask me, the professor in me says, "Boy, you lost a teaching moment."
Yeah.
You could have said, "Here's another breakthrough for Mobile Fidelity."
Yeah.
We have, after careful consideration, after doing dozens, perhaps hundreds of listening tests, we've come to the conclusion that the best way for us to minimize wear on source tapes and to produce a quality product at the other end that is eminently repeatable, that unlocks us from stamping numbers and all the rest of that. That was a goal.
Diminish tape to tape distortions and diminish any playback speed errors. I mean, it was such a moment for them to step out in front and lead the way.
Sure. And had anybody at MoFi called me at the time, I know people there, I'll be glad to tell you what you should do.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I didn't know. I didn't know any more than anybody else did.
Yeah.
It wasn't until suddenly out of nowhere this hurricane came floating in that I realized there was an issue. Now, my issue is not the same as the guys issuing the lawsuits.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm saddened by is that the teaching moment was lost, and I think, I don't own MoFi stock. I'm not
Yeah.
an insider. I got friends there, and I've known them a long time, but they probably were afraid of losing the analog purists.
Yeah.
Those folks, as soon as they saw digital, they just go running for the hills.
I'm certain that was the motivation, David. It's the only plausible explanation as to why they wouldn't have done it. They knew that it was the right thing to do. They just were afraid of losing a certain segment of the market.
The analog purists. Now, addressing them briefly, what I would say is this. I understand your position. I myself am deeply into all analog when I can get it. I'm generally I'm a very happy guy, although I've heard some crappy all analog stuff too.
Oh yeah. No doubt.
But if you've not really delved into quad DSD, then you don't even understand what the possibilities are, and then you running for the hills or shouting and screaming is irrational.
Well, it shows your own ignorance. Instead of taking the time to learn and make an informed decision based on what you're hearing, you're just reacting, and that's just dangerous, man.
Yeah, well, you're militantly irrational.
Some of them are militant about it.
Yeah, and what you were perfectly happy right up to the point that suddenly it was revealed to you that for many years there had been quad DSD in there. As soon as I heard it, my reaction was good, because I know what all the blessings and benefits of that are. And had they asked me, I would have said, go for it. Just let people know. That's it.
Yeah. The transparency issue was, yeah.
That's all there was to it. They're going to have to, when you ask me the future, of course, the future is imponderable in some ways, but I would say that they've got, on the trust side of things, they've got work to do.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where I see the biggest issue. When I did that video a couple of weeks ago or whatever it was, I said there were two basic issues. One, the sense of betrayal that some people have felt, this broken trust.
Right.
And I said, but the other issue that I think is, that was the egregious thing that happened, was the fact that they wouldn't face up to it and weren't transparent about it. And through obfuscation and effusive language, let people believe. They never came out and said, yes, we are absolutely all. They just let people believe that they were all analog. Yeah.
Well, they said enough things that these are sins of omission.
Yeah. Yeah.
They left it. Now you look at their website now, you'll find there's DSD 256 right there, the second step.
Yeah.
And so now they're racing to be obvious and transparent about it,
which is the right thing to do now. But
sure. And
I said from the beginning of this debacle that, guys, look, if you want to turn on them, that's fine. If you think you were betrayed, that's fine. To some degree, there's some merit to that belief, but listen to the bloody recordings.
Sure.
Just play them. If you still don't think they sound as good as you want, great. But for the most part, David, I don't know what your experience has been, but for the most part, most of these records sound amazingly good. And many times they sound better, or at least as good as first pressings. Not always.
But of course the tapes are not in the same condition either.
Right. Exactly.
It's been decades in some cases for these tapes. And so what you have to do is you have to take the good with the bad, or the bad with the good in this case, and there'll be collectors who are going to debate this versus that versus the other pressings and where's the good stuff. And some albums, I was just reading a discussion last night about Supertramp's Breakfast in America, which apparently no known human process is going to improve beyond the kind of chaotic, not good sound that comes out. I mean, it's just a poor production. They have other albums that were much better.
Well, I will say that the UHQR from '82
Right.
of Crime of the Century
Right.
is staggeringly good.
Well, Crime of the Century is high on the list. Breakfast in America is low on the list.
Yep.
Totally different productions, obviously.
Yep.
So we can go back and forth with that. But what I would say is, friends, if you have an album from MoFi, a one step that was produced using DSD 256, you are hearing the source tape.
Yeah,
as expressed in vinyl.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that on a certain turntable system, even things that people assume are groove noise and the like aren't.
Dude.
And so when we look at the full possibilities of vinyl playback, I would say that a good source tape, as close to the original as possible, archived to DSD 256, and then used to press as many. They have to pay a licensing fee. If they want to run another 5,000 or 10,000, they pay. They write a check.
Yeah.
They press them. They go.
Yeah.
Every one of those will be every bit as good as the very first run.
Yeah.
Every bit as good.
Yeah.
And so you haven't. Maybe you've been frustrated by the fact that you haven't seen. They should have been transparent. They should have let me know, because I have this atavistic fear of digital because I don't know how good it can be.
Right.
Digital's just wrong, which is crap.
Yeah. Well, in 1982, I could see support for that argument, but that was
not now. No.
Yeah, that was 40 years ago.
State of the art. I've used it.
Yeah.
I've had it here. I've done my own conversions. I've done transfers. I've done needle drops. I've done all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, friends, I know my listening room intimately.
Yeah, I'm
If you
sure.
were to come in here and I were to blindfold you, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the original and the quad DSD at all.
Yeah.
At all. So you haven't been robbed.
You haven't.
No. They were not honest and truthful in coming out with this because they were afraid of you.
Yeah.
They were afraid of the irrational.
Yeah.
And look, they were right.
Apparently, look at what's going on now.
Your reaction simply says they had reason to be concerned.
Yeah.
So it'll depend on, ultimately MoFi's future is going to depend on whether they can get this resolved. If they have to get out their checkbook, how big a check they're going to have to write. They don't have unlimited resources.
No.
They could be bankrupted.
I will say I hope not. I hope for good reason. I hope not. People want to feel that they've been their trust has been betrayed, or they've been somehow hoodwinked. Okay, feel that way, but let's keep making good records, people.
Yes,
jeez.
Definitely. We have the two greatest reissue companies around, largest, most influential, which is not to say there are other great reissue companies around too. I'm not slighting them at all. But look, Analog Productions and Mobile Fidelity, that's the gold standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are other companies doing really great work, Impex Records, Groove Note, Speaker's Corner, on and on and on. You can go down through, the list
Sure.
at least as well as I do.
Sure.
And so, which is why you cost me so much money. But
You know, I'm not apologizing for that
I,
either.
right. He didn't ask permission. He just asked for forgiveness. But the fact is that they're going. If we lose mobile fidelity, then we lose a very substantial source of
Yeah.
great recordings and a very long tradition of doing things. This is frankly, this is mainly a marketing slip up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
They may have to write a check or two.
Yeah.
Me, it didn't change. I've been praising mobile fidelity
Yeah.
discs, and my reaction is nothing changes.
I just wish they'd have taken the high road and said, look at what we're doing for you.
Yeah.
Had they introduced this as a benefit instead of oh, this is all we can do, they should have gotten out in front of this and made it a feature.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Not a bug. This is a feature. If you get out there and you use it as a teaching moment, and we have come to the conclusion that Quad DSD has reached a point of excellence in its implementation, that we are absolutely confident in saying that for this one step, we're actually doing a service to the audio arts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because now there's a Quad DSD copy. The guys, we would be a whole lot better off if the guys at, let's say, EMI Abbey Roads would get off their asses and pull Quad DSD copies, transfers of all the Beatles albums.
Yeah.
Get your whichever edition. We've had several remasterings here of late.
And they're all,
get them all.
Yeah. Because they're all 60, 50 or 55 years old now. So
get the thing. Now those master tapes are in most cases multi-track.
Yeah.
And so what we get the stereo mastering that was done over time. Yeah. And many people say, hey, they paid attention to the mono.
Yeah.
They put more time into the mono than they did in the stereo.
Yeah.
And so I don't care. Pull Quad DSD of everything. And you can actually get large rigs that could preserve multi-track in Quad DSD. Yeah. No problem. Emerging Technologies builds that technology. So it can be done, guys. And it should have been a good teaching moment, and the opportunity was lost. And then, when you reach the point of not being transparent with something, well, over time it becomes harder and harder. What are you going to do? 2 years, 3 years down? Well, we left something out.
Yeah.
Then you're going to get something that was worse than what would have happened if you had simply come out in the first place.
Absolutely.
You can't.
As evidenced by this debacle.
Yeah, you can't be sued by people who said, "Oh, I'm not buying that."
Yeah.
I can't sue you. That's for sure. So,
Dr. Robinson, I got to tell you, I cannot thank you enough for your willingness to share your knowledge and time with us today. It's always fun talking to you, buddy.
Great fun. Always. You're a really good amigo, and I really enjoy our times talking.
Well, we're going to do this again as long as you're game, because I love having you come on the channel. It's such a pleasure to talk with you, buddy.
Sure, it's a great privilege. And the word I would give to the listeners in closing would be, you're not worse off. You weren't robbed as far as audio quality was concerned. Your worldview may have gotten dinged, and all of us should be honest with one another.
Yeah.
Okay, in all realms of life, be honest, transparent with each other. Don't resort to prevarication, trying to fine tune it. Just speak the truth.
Yeah.
And as Mark Twain once said, always tell the truth. It'll gratify some people and amaze the rest.
Yes, indeed.
And so this point forward, it's an object lesson to the industry.
Yeah.
I hope everybody learns it. My suspicion is that there's more going on here. We haven't even talked about
yeah.
it.
Oh, yeah.
There are equivalent problems going on in other labels having nothing to do with MoFi that I know directly about, and the superset issue that I've been concerned about and frustrated about for many years, provenance.
Yeah.
We're not speaking, the labels are not speaking the truth.
Yeah.
Oftentimes what is represented as original master tape, et cetera, blah, 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 isn't.
Yeah.
We get whatever some intern somewhere wants to pick off the shelf, and they may not know much. We need to know the exact provenance of tapes and processes, the sources and the processes used on those to produce the recordings that we are, in some cases, paying some very serious money
for. Yeah.
That needs to be something that everyone in the music production industry needs to take to heart. Because if they don't, you're going to end up with a bucket load of cynicism. You're going to end up with people, you can't trust nobody. No how, no way.
Yeah.
If we get to that point, then audio as a community is going to fragment.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Greg, thanks for having me aboard.
Buddy, thanks for taking the time. I know you're a busy man. I am so grateful to have you come on and share your knowledge with us. You're one of the few guys that I know of that's an expert that can talk about this. So
I know. Well, it's whatever I have that's of use to others, I'm glad to share.
Well, that's why I run this channel. That's why I'm out here.
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly. So,
Dr. Robinson, thank you again, sir.
All right.
I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, my friend.
Bye-bye.
David, thank you so very much for your willingness to share so much of your valuable time, experience, and understanding with us here today. My viewers have no idea how much they are in your debt. Thank you again, my friend. We simply can't thank you enough for this vast and comprehensive dissertation. Everyone, thank you for taking the time to drop by today. Please click the subscribe and notify buttons if you haven't already. Be sure to share your comments or questions. And please don't forget to like and share links to your favorite episodes with your friends or on social media. Further information on supporting the channel may be found in today's description section or at my website, theaudioanalyst.com. Please stay safe and keep the music playing. Till next time, cheers.